For our next story, do Axel Rudakubana's parents deserve sympathy? This is a question that seems to be posed by a new piece in the Daily Mail this week by Sarah Rainey. And she has spoken to residents of Southport about the family, their experiences living on the same street as them, and I think that we have reached a bizarre place, morally, as a civilization, where we do not attribute any blame for the crimes committed by children and adolescents to their parents, the way they raised them, and whether or not their moral instruction, or in this case, perhaps lack of moral instruction, contributed to their deranged and murderous beliefs. And I don't think we can prevent atrocities like this happening again, and I don't think we can stitch up this festering cultural moral wound in Britain that has opened up over decades but seems to be sorest after the Southport murders. I don't think we can begin the healing process for that until we confront the fact that, yes, Axel Rudakubana's parents bear some blame for raising a killer in Britain's midst after being generously given asylum by its host population. So Rainey writes, "We honestly didn't know they existed." This is one blunt response from a local deli worker, but the Rudakubana name is now famous, not just in Banks, and this is in Southport, but around the world, for few could fail to know of the heinous violence with which it is now synonymous, after Axel Rudakubana, the youngest of the family, then 18, savagely killed 3 young girls and inflicted life-altering injuries on 10 others at a Taylor Swift dance class one fateful day last July. Since then, the distinctive surname, which hails from the family's native Rwanda, has been inextricably tied to the horrors that unfolded, and others who bear it, and that's Axel's father Alphonse, his mother Laetitia, and his elder brother, have found themselves forever tarred by the atrocities that he wrought. Reminder, we were meant to think of this man as a Welsh choir boy, and this identity was deliberately withheld from us from Merseyside Police, the Crown Prosecution Service, and Keir Starmer, and, as a Home Affairs Select Committee report revealed last month, the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police had considered publicising the family's Christian faith, even though Axel Rudakubana never attended church with them and reportedly attends mosque while in Belmarsh. She thought to publicise that selectively to protect Muslim communities. So, bear that in mind when the narrative built by this piece in the Daily Mail is being spun. Is this to protect the reputations of not only the family, but the broader class to which they belong, which is immigrants, refugees, non-white, non-British, and, because of Rudakubana and the targets of the Southport protests and riots, religious minorities, mainly Muslims in the country. Now, the piece tries to depict the family as sympathetic refugees. And this is quite perverse, obviously, because little sympathy, little profiles, except the one in the Times, which was harrowing reading about the families of the 3 murdered girls and how they read their daughters' bodies' bedtime stories before saying goodbye to them in the hospital. How the families have received very little in terms of these sympathetic profiles, but for some reason the Mail thought to run a sympathetic profile on Rudakubana's family as if to exonerate them of any blame for bringing up Axel as a murderer obsessed with white genocide. So the Rudakubana family had been through hell and back before this, the Mail writes, although long before either of their sons were born. Alphonse and Laetitia fled Rwanda in 2002 as a result of the 1994 genocide, in which their lives and those of their families, all members of the Tutsi tribe, were thrown into jeopardy. Laetitia had a prosperous upbringing. Her father worked for the Ministry of Agriculture and her mother was a teacher. Okay, so they are connected to the Rwandan government, both before the genocide and also seemingly after, as we'll read in a moment. So one would think that they would be safe to return to Rwanda now that the genocide is long in the rearview mirror of history. She lost more than 200 family members, including an older sister, between April and June 1994 during the genocide and was forced to flee her home. Recalling what happened, one of her surviving sisters said in 2020, Kigali was filled with dead bodies. It was catastrophic. We had to begin again from zero. Alphonse Rudakubana, from a less wealthy family, is believed to have survived the massacre by hiding in the wilderness before taking up arms with what became the ruling party under Paul Kagame the Rwandan Patriotic Front and relocating to Uganda. Okay, question. If he was living in Uganda, if he had the protection of that government, if he had the protection of the following government and should have been lauded as a war hero, as a member of Paul Kagame's patriotic front, why did he need to come to the UK? Why did he pick the UK to relocate to at all? We don't know this because the family's immigration file and the decision to grant them asylum have been sealed. They're not publicly available. Nobody's asked in Parliament about this. Why do we not know about the conditions under which the Rudakubana family was relocated to the UK, which is pertinent because if they had not been, and had not raised Axel Rudakubana in the way that they had, none of these girls would be dead. So it is a matter of public interest as to why the Rudakubana family was allowed to settle in Britain, given right to asylum, and raise their children in such a negligent fashion. So Alphonse and Letitia met sometime in the 1990s before coming to the UK to find a better life, and unfortunately raising a son that robbed a lot of young girls of theirs. Alphonse later got a job as a minicab driver in Southport, and the whole family relocated in 2013 in search of a bigger house and more stability. Now, those are very interesting. Alphonse Rudakubana worked as a taxi driver, got a bigger house. Now, as far as his books look, he wasn't operating a very prosperous business. How did they afford that house? Were they the beneficiaries of any subsidies from the British taxpayer? Again, another question that deserves to be asked, one that we don't have answers to, but it would show that if they were, they did not repay the kindness extended to them by the British public, our government and our state, with the respect that it was due. And so, it again raises questions about whether or not they did the right thing as parents, whether or not they were gracious house guests, and whether or not they bear blame in part for the Southport massacre. A family friend told the Mail that both Rudakubana, the Axel, and his brother went to school in the village of Sefton before they bought their new house in Banks on a social housing plot for just $41,000. Right. So it seems that they were the beneficiaries of subsidised housing. Again, why is the British government allowing these people to settle in their country when seemingly they were safe in Uganda? Why are they giving them subsidies at the expense of the native population? And why, then, are these people, in their ingratitude, raising killers in our midst who have nothing but contempt for the native host population who gave their parents refuge on the basis of their skin colour? And then we are also paying for them to now live under police protection in hiding. But the taxpayer is paying for this. So why is the Mail presenting this as the parents being the victims of the son they raised crimes? I think the British public, as a collective, are being punished by the Rudakubanas despite showing them undue and immense hospitality. Both boys were later pupils at Range High School in Formby, 14 miles away. Money was tight, and the following year, Alphonse set up an online retail business, that's Redknapp Limited, a nod perhaps to English football, the piece writes, selling bric-a-brac such as floor mats, laptop stands, and jewellery. The enterprise never made more than a few £1,000s a year, barely enough to tide them over. Still, Alphonse and Letitia were determined to give their sons everything they possibly could. Again, the enterprise never made more than a few £1,000s a year, barely enough to tide them over. Okay, then how did they have this home? I mean, number one, they've bought a social house and they've treated it like this. This is the family living room, right? Why did they live in such squalor? Was the insane Axel Rudakubana responsible for all of this mess? Why did their parents not clean it up? Why were they inflicting their son, who is in a wheelchair as well, and I don't see how he navigates this living room, why were they inflicting this onto their innocent other son to live in such squalor, if this was a responsibility of their son alone? Or why were the parents living like this for years, and presumably bringing up both of their sons, Dion and Axel, in a chaotic environment that no doubt contributed to Axel Rudakubana's murderous madness? There's a curious statement in this piece here too. Certainly, there is no evidence that Alphonse or Letitia were ever able to return home to Rwanda, nor that their sons ever travelled to Rwanda. They had no family and few friends in the UK, something that is evident on Letitia's social media, where she often sent melancholy messages to family members far away. Why did they not return to Rwanda? There hasn't been a genocide there for 3 decades. They have connections with the ruling government. Again, Alphonse served in the Rwandan Patriotic Army that then became the Patriotic Front under Paul Kagame, who is still the president. He became the president, curiously, in 2000, and Alphonse claimed asylum in the UK in 2002. So 8 years after the genocide, 2 years after his fellow Rwandan Patriotic Front member, Paul Kagame, took power and has been in power basically ever since. Why was he given asylum in the UK? His life wasn't under any threat. If anything, he would be lauded as a war hero by the regime, right? And then, of course, Rudakubana's mother is apparently related to the General Secretary of the Rwandan Patriotic Front. He's one of the regime's most powerful officials. That's according to The Guardian, by the way. So why did they stay in the country if they couldn't support themselves and had to receive social housing and presumably some sort of supplementary benefit to enable their lifestyle that allows them to buy so much clutter and just leave it lying around? I mean, if you're really that impoverished, I don't see why all the Amazon packages are there and stacked up in the image. Why were they staying in the country if they had no close friends? Why didn't they volunteer at the church congregation? They supposedly were devout Christians. They could have enmeshed themselves and given back to their community after the country had given them so much. If they were unhappy here, why didn't they return? Why are they still here? Why are we still paying for them? All of these questions have yet to be asked by the media, by politicians. They are vital in understanding how Axel Rudakubana was brought up as a killer, and rather than have them asked and be answered, we're getting apologetic texts like this in the Daily Mail, which I think is just morally egregious. And so, how did they repay this country's kindness? Well, there's a few quotes here from people that lived around them. A few families who lived on the street with them have left the area because of what happened. They feel they couldn't stay. They were too upset, a local explains. First to go, of course, were Alphonse and Letitia themselves, who left the area on the day that Axel was arrested, never to return. Although they gave witness statements and cooperated with the police, neither appeared in court, nor have they been seen publicly since that day. So they're under police protection. Alphonse and Letitia have faced their share of blame for what happened in a heated debate on online forums and social media, and in the political sphere when then Reform MP Rupert Lowe asked shortly after the sentencing in January, what did any of the family know? Again, a question by an MP that hasn't been answered. There were, of course, the repeated calls they made to local police for help in managing their son's behaviour, and the apparent aborted attack just a week before the stabbings, when Alphonse pleaded with a taxi driver not to drive his son, who was hell-bent on violence, away. Right, this is the thwarted attack in question. A week beforehand, Axel Rudakubana, using a pseudonym, called a taxi to his old school that he got kicked out of for threats of violence and bringing a knife in, and then coming back to the school with a hockey stick and smashing a fellow pupil's arm. Alphonse came out of the house, pleaded with his son not to get in the taxi, and called him back inside. Why was his son not immediately committed to a psychiatric institution or had the police called on him? Because we don't, after everything that's come out about this family, we have zero confirmation that Alphonse Rudakubana decided to call the police, despite presumably knowing what his son was doing. Like, why was he getting a taxi to the school after having already been excluded and then having already gone to the school years before to commit an act of violence against his pupils? Surely he knew his son was up to no good. Why did he not have the authorities intervene then? Again, a question has not been answered. Hasn't even been asked in this Daily Mail piece, which is essentially massaging the reputations of the Rudakubana family, despite being directly responsible, not only for raising their murderous son, but for failing to intervene at clear opportunities when they could have, including up to a week before he committed the massacre, in the same outfit. They didn't exactly give back much to the British people who took them in out of the kindness of their hearts, did they? Then there was the family living room, which, as chilling photographs revealed in court, was being used as a bedroom by the killer, so this is where Axel was apparently sleeping. Not exactly great conditions, is it? The floor was strewn with Amazon parcels containing knives, while under the bed there was a Tupperware box with a deadly poison rice in. Time and time again, Alphonse and Letitia must have asked themselves, what could we have done differently? How, they were surely agonised, did our son become such a monster? Why are we positioning the questions as to the anguish of Alphonse and Letitia? Why are we not asking instead, whose Amazon account did Axel Rudakubana use to order knives? Presumably it wasn't his own, because he wouldn't have had his own credit card as a minor, or he possibly had his own debit card, but then if the family was so impoverished as to barely afford anything, how would he have had the disposable income to do so? Also, the knife on Amazon requires an age verification check. And presumably, the Amazon delivery driver had to have conducted that age verification check at the door on the day, occasionally with taking a photo of the person holding the parcel. Was there such a photo? Does it still exist? Is there something on the Amazon system? And whose account was the order made on? Was it made on his dad's account? And we know that neighbours were texting Alphonse about packages that kept being delivered to their house when the Amazon delivery driver was knocking on their door, because Axel Rudakubana was redirecting the parcels to his neighbours as to try and evade detection from his parents. And Alphonse had responded to his neighbours saying, "Yep, I'll get Axel to stop ordering them to your house." So are we to expect that Alphonse didn't know what his son was ordering, including ricin-making equipment and knives? Why are we exculpating them of any wrongdoing? It's mysterious to me. I think it's just that we have, in our atomized liberal morality, the belief that people are entirely self-generative, or that all of their external cultural input actually forms their character more than their homes do, which is why we place a lot more premium on social media and institutions for value formation than the household. And so somehow we are acting as if a defective child is not the responsibility of their parents' negligent or malevolent parenting. And so we're just told to ignore this and instead manufacture consent for further online censorship measures and ban the sale of knives to housewives over Amazon. As if we can't engage in pattern recognition and see who is committing these exact kinds of heinous crimes and why, and accurately allocate blame to the parents who raised him, and instead blame the wider society as if we've got some kind of reflecting to do, because two refugees, long after the massacre that they have cited as their reason to move to the UK has ended, came over here, seemed to have taken state benefits, and without any gratitude at all, raised a child to have murderous contempt for white people. And I'm not exaggerating that, by the way. So I've documented this in a previous Substack post. Now, before the attack is blamed on any bullying by his classmates or any sort of social media content that Axel Rudakubana here was consuming, it should be noted that Rudakubana, organically and of his own volition, was obsessed with things like white genocide. So during a football match, he told fellow pupils that he wanted white genocide. That one official told The Guardian he was absolutely obsessed with genocides. He could name every genocide in history and how many people were killed. Rwanda, Genghis Khan, Hitler. It's all he wanted to talk about. And even if we are to blame all of the materials he was consuming online, for example, downloading to his personal tablet documents on ISIS car bombs, Nazi Germany, violence involving Buddhists in Sri Lanka, ethnic clan-based cleansing in Somalia, the Rwandan genocide, of course, the Iraq and Balkan wars and depictions of torture and beheadings. He'd also researched the 2024 Sydney church stabbing of Bishop Mar Mari Emanuel by a suspected Islamist. He also had copious amounts of post-colonial literature in his bedroom, including A Place Under Heaven, Amerindian torture and cultural violence, the Mau Mau War, British counterinsurgency in colonial Kenya, death and survival during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, examination of punishments dealt to slave rebels in two 18th century British plantation societies, and, before the poison had been far spread, about 18th century British plantations in Antigua and South Carolina. If we're to blame all of that material that he was reading and researching for his festering ethnic resentment against the British and whites more broadly, for perceived racial injustices against him, and his desire to inflict this civilizational vengeance on their innocent children, even if we're to blame those materials, where did he get the money to purchase them? Are we to expect that his parents never saw all of these books under his bed and asked about his keen interest in genocide and post-colonial history? Who bought him the tablet and gave him unrestricted access to the internet? And if he was bringing this up to school classmates, did he really not bring this up in family settings? Did he really not mention this at the dinner table, if there was one? Are we to expect his parents knew nothing about this? Because if you're telling me that, you're taking me for an absolute fool. And I think most people know that this is the case. Most people know that the parents bear some form of responsibility for raising this killer in our midst. And so it is deeply insulting that the male decides to put this piece out and act as if they are somehow the victims of circumstances that they themselves have engineered and then inflicted the deleterious consequences on innocent children and an entire country that they plunged into grief. Like, are we to expect that they didn't know about the mysterious box of ricin brewing under his bed? Are we expected to know that they didn't bring him inside and immediately discuss the purpose for which he had ordered a taxi to his old school a week before the massacre? Are we expected to know the parents knew nothing, could do nothing, and are completely blameless for the murderer they brought up? And this is the most bitter part of this, as I mentioned in here, this is Dion Rudakubana. This is his brother. His brother bears no responsibility for the crimes. It's not even comparable to that of his parents. Even if he and his brother were not particularly close during their upbringing, that's all just speculative, by the way. He is as much a victim of this chaotic, irresponsible, at the very least, household as the victims of the murders themselves are. However, it is to be pointed out that Dion Rudakubana is the beneficiary of local charity. So the family, apparently, couldn't afford anything, needed to remain in the country, claim housing benefit, probably some form of supplementary income benefit as well. Dion Rudakubana received a new wheelchair after he lost the use of his legs from 5 Southport-based Rotary clubs. So that's Southport Club, Southport Links, Southport Moles, Southport Sunrise, and Formby Club. They all combined forces to donate to his wheelchair. That is an absolutely wonderful act of kindness by the local community. Okay. Why were the Rudakubana family not sufficiently grateful to then ensure they raised their sons to help out in the community, show deference to the population that took them in? Why did they not feel the need to inculcate in their children an appreciation for the civilization that gave them so much after their home country had just massacred people like them for looking as they do? A crime which their own son would go on to perpetrate against innocent children for looking differently to him. It's an extra bitter pill for the British public to swallow, that the local Southport community gave so much to this family, and commendably so, that was then repaid in kind in the blood of innocents. And so that's why it's just additionally insulting that the Daily Mail piece ends here, right? They will never return to Southport, says Church Elder Jeff Grice. That's it for them, I think. It's impossible. They will find a new home at British taxpayers' expense. Like, why are they not being questioned and then deported to Rwanda? For what I think is criminal levels of negligence raising a child like this in that home, of which we have photos. Why are they not answering questions about how Axel Rudakubana was able to order rice and materials and a knife? And why he was stockpiling anti-white resentment texts and materials on his tablet and under his bed? Like, why are they allowed to find a new home in this country when the 3 dead children will never return to their families again? Wrenched from his friends, his studies and his future, Rudakubana's brother may never be able to go back to the life he had 12 months ago. Now that is a great shame. For he, like his parents, is collateral damage in this terrible tale of 2 brothers. No, the parents are not collateral damage. The parents are responsible. They have lots of questions to answer that either have not yet been asked or have been asked by the likes of Rupert Lowe and have received deafening silence. The parents are not the victims here. The Daily Mail is disgusting for suggesting that they are. They are as much responsible for raising Axel Rudakubana as the demented materials that he was accessing online and in the text snatched under his bed were in fomenting this racial resentment that drove him to commit those murders. They are responsible. And so to depict them as innocent victims in this is just an inversion of morality. And if we never get answers on this, truly, we suffer from an incurable moral sickness in Britain.